Okay, so what we're going to try to do today is we're going to do some proving of trigonometric identities or some show that's for trigonometric identities. Remember that a show that is when you start on one side and you end up on the other side. So we're going to be using that formula today, or using that format today, to figure out what some of these trigonometric identities equal, if they are identities or not, first off, and then we'll look at how to prove them. So the first step is to figure out if, in fact, these equations that we're given are identities. So the first step to do that is really easy. And I don't care who you are, you can do this part, okay? So as we look at that first step, okay, so what we're going to do is, I've given you 6 identities here, and what we're going to do is, or 6 equations, and what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to first open up Desmos or a graphing calculator, it doesn't matter which, and we're going to verify to see if in fact these are identities. So the very first identity that we had was cosine squared plus sine squared equals 1. We know that's the Pythagorean identity, so here's what we're looking for. We're going to go back to our Desmos, and we're going to type in our calculator, cosine squared x plus sine squared x. So that's our first graph. And then on the second graph, we're going to type in the right side, which is 1. So we're going to have, here we have y equals, and here we have y equals. And what you should see is that they are the same graph, okay? Now remember that your Desmos defaults to radians. If you did it in degrees, it's still the same thing. Okay, so this is in fact true. So we come back here and we have said that this is an identity, and we've actually said this is the Pythagorean identity. So the next one we're going to check is we're going to see, does 1 minus tan squared, so we're going to go up here, we're going to go up here, and we'll go to 1 minus tan squared, 1 minus tan squared, and we want to know if that equals the secant. Secant is, hold on, let's double check, make sure I'm typing this in, equals the secant squared. The secant is 1 divided by the cosine squared. So are those the same? Those are not the same. So this would not be an identity. So we would go back here and we would simply write that it is not an identity. Okay? The next one we know is an identity, but we're going to graph it. So it's sine 2x equals 2, so we have y equals sine 2x. I'm going to put that in parentheses. And the other one I have is 2 sine x times cosine x. Okay, and we've got that typed in with all of our parentheses, and we can see that they are the same. So this is verifying that these are one on top of the other. So I can go back and I can put this in, and we know that this is an identity. And specifically, we know that it's the double angle identity. Okay, so that takes care of that. Now we're going to check this next one, which is sine x minus cosine squared x. So I'm going to go back here and I'm going to type in sine x minus cosine squared x. And I want to know if that, oh, that's a funky looking one, isn't it? Isn't that cool? And I want to know if that equals sine x times 1 plus sine x. So I know if that equals sine x times the quantity 1 plus sine x. It's not liking how I have that typed in, so maybe I need to put parentheses here. There it does. Okay, are those identities? They are not, because they are not on top of one another. So we could go back and record that that is not an identity. Okay, so the next thing would be 2 cosine x plus 2 sine squared x. So I'm going to go up here. I forgot the equation that simply. 2 cosine x plus 2 sine squared x. 2 cosine x plus 2 sine squared x. That's one of them. And the other one is 1. I can already see these are not going to be the same. And that's not an identity. Isn't that a cool one? That kind of looks like teeth, right? So that's the very first thing that we've got to be able to do, is we've got to be able to graph them and decide whether they're identities or not. And so what I'm going to ask you to do now is the next step in this learning path. I'm going to give you some equations, and I want you to graph them and decide if they're an identity or not an identity.